So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. Welcome to Ananke's Festival of Literature. And I'm really excited about the fact that we have had conversations about home. It's complicated, but it's been limited to particular members of a city at a festival there. And the fact that Ananke's festival is virtual just allows us to get contributors of the anthology from different parts of the world, which is so exciting. So thank you for taking time out. And just as Amber was saying earlier, a quick note on the book. It's been so heartening because I've been receiving messages from strangers and people we know alike, but often I'll get a little something from someone I have no idea where they're from and who they are. And a certain piece would have resonated. They'll send a little something. So I just want to start out by saying I'm so grateful to all of you for being a part of this book. And that's the only way in which it actually got over the finish line and reached fruition. So thank you so much for being here and for being a part of the book. Okay, so we'll get started. And Zen, not to put you on the spot, but this is the first conversation we're having with you about your piece, which packs such a punch. I mean, it's really powerful. And you teach creative writing, Zen. Your piece is titled Unlearning Elizabeth. And I found it to be this really quirky, witty, and edgy piece. You know, it's a tone that not many of the other pieces in the anthology have taken. In fact, Amber and I have like spoken about this at length on many occasions. And so I think you, through delving into the kinds of stories that your students write, you've kind of and their obsession in a sense with Elizabeth, that's become a segue into talking about much bigger issues, not least of all the colonial hangover that we're constantly grappling with. And I wanna just read out a little bit from your piece, Zain, where you end it by saying, Elizabeth is not going anywhere anytime soon. That much is clear. But I pray we are on our way to producing a worthy opponent to stand up to her when the time is right. An imagination that values its own histories, its own people, its own landscapes, and its own futures. So let's start there. Talk to us a little bit about choosing this fascinating direction for your piece and how we might, in fact, stand up to Elizabeth. Let's start there.
Oh, thank you for that wonderful description of what I wrote. Again, I think I've told you this, but when you asked me if I wanted to contribute something, I was just like, okay, this is the first thing that came to mind. I usually need people to tell me to write, and then I write, and it just happens. So I think why it came and where it came from was this frustration that I've dealt with forever, ever since I started teaching creative writing, which was back in 2017 in Austin. That was the first time I taught, but that was in America, so I guess that wasn't as bad. But I came to Habib and IBA and IVS, and I taught in all three places in one semester in Karachi. And literally every second story I got from those students was it had a George, it had an Elizabeth, it had a David, it had New York, it had bars, it had clubs. I was like, how many of you have been to bars? How many of you have been to clubs? Who are these people? And honestly, the answers they gave me was like, oh, I saw this in a movie, I saw this in a cartoon, I saw this, I've read this in the two books that I've read. Everyone's read two books in Karachi, and those are The Alchemist and 40 Rules of Love. Those are, if you teach at universities in Karachi, those are the only two books you're going to get. Um, yeah, so it, and that kept on happening every semester, and it was just a trend. And that was, I think, when I decided that my job was going to be to get these students out of that mindset. I mean, that's not a job. That's an endeavor that won't end ever. But it's just I was like, okay, this is what my angle is going to be. I remember when I was a student at LUMS, Bilal with Bilal Tanveer, he taught like a creative writing workshop. When I was there, and that was my first experience with writing, and he used to say the same things. But I think at that time I wasn't ready to listen to them, or I wasn't really interested or invested enough to really feel what he was trying to say. But now that I had these about like 100 students a semester across 3 universities just talking about George, I was like, guys, there's other things to do. There's other things to say. And I think to add to that, when I moved to Morocco to teach a year ago, and I saw the same thing, that really set me off. Because they're also a colonized peoples, but they have a very different relationship to their colonizers, the French. But they too, because they were asked to reproduce writing in English, all they wrote about was George, was Elizabeth, was David, was and they're just reproducing these Netflix shows that they've seen or these movies that they've watched. So that's where this anger or this frustration, as you said, came from. That's also a thing where the voice of the piece came from, which was just a kind of frustrated, I'm done with this kind of thing. But also, like, there's a deep sadness that I always feel when I talk to students, both in Pakistan and Morocco. Is like, why don't you guys talk about you? Why don't you guys talk about the things you know and the things you've seen and the things you've lived? And the reason why I said that Elizabeth isn't going anywhere anytime soon is because, unfortunately, I don't think I should say that Pakistan or the global South doesn't produce good art. That is not true at all. But unfortunately, the art that gets seen or the art that gets pushed or the art that gets kind of thrust into the mainstream is not from here. And regardless of how much representation the West keeps touting or keeps saying, oh, we're doing it. Unfortunately, that's still a very specific kind of representation, a strange, exoticized representation. That's not what I'm after. That's not what I want my students to do or anyone to do. So yeah, that's kind of where I was, where I am, where I think will be for forever. But that's where the idea of the piece came from.
Yeah, thanks, Zain. Thank you. Sundus, I'm going to come to you now. You know, your piece, I've obviously read it multiple times through the editing and once the book came out as well. And, you know, it's just such, I genuinely mean this, it's such an act of valor and courage and sheer vulnerability. You write about the trappings of patriarchy, you write about being a mother, you know, kind of being bogged down with social expectations that come with being a mother. As a parent myself, I know those are hard things to write about and be honest about. You know, and this sense I got from your piece was this feeling of being stuck and how climbing that whole Nanga Parbat, not just the actual, you know, when you reached, but the whole ascent, right from when you left to when you know, reached the climax of that. It becomes such a metaphor for kind of untrapping yourself. And I found that to be profoundly powerful and really evocative. I think a lot of other people, as I said to you, even on social media, have come back and it's really spoken to them. And one of the things that I keep thinking when I read your piece is that it shows me that resilience and not just rebellion is also a form of feminism and agency and empowerment. Because a lot of times we have this sense that unless you're holding a placard and shouting, you're not empowered. And your piece was this quietly fierce, quietly confident one. Tell us about navigating this patriarchy right from when you were a young girl. I mean, before we started the recording, you spoke about how you spent a year at LUMS. I'd forgotten that incidentally and didn't complete the degree. You know, how your perspective on this has evolved over time, and also just the physical and the emotional labor of the trek. It's a huge undertaking. You know, you left your younger son behind, if I'm not mistaken, your youngest. So let's start there. Talk to us. A lot of things in there, but yeah.
Okay, so my piece is centered around a trip I took, trekking trip I took to Fairy Meadows. If you're from Lams, it's something, we do, right? And sadly, before I could go on that trip, I got married. Okay. So I got married in 2003. Yeah. So, from 2003, I had been thinking of going on that trip. And after 10 years, I finally decided that I would go, right? But the thing was, I went as a family. I took two of my kids. They were under 8. We went. So my piece is centered around that trip, and it was a difficult period in my in my life. I had 3 kids under the age of 8. It was, it was very difficult. It was exhausting, and I felt like I was like losing myself. There was nothing, my dreams had been sidelined. There was nothing for me, right? So, and I realized that when I went on this trip, I realized it's only when you get out of your comfort zone, you come to realize that, we shouldn't always be just, reminiscing about all that, about our past, and, wallowing in what we have lost, right? When you step out of your comfort zone, you realize that, there's things to be grateful for, right? The same thing, our relationship with Pakistan is the same, right? We focus too much on all that is wrong rather than finding a solution. And that's exactly what I was doing at that point in my life, right? Finding everything that was wrong, and why I was doing that was because, I had realized that, maturing is about, shifting your dreams, right? You don't get stuck on something that you wanted to do. And if it's not happening, you try to find reason of doing something else, right? You try to find a new dream too, and the same way, because as a family, as my parents didn't bring me up to be, didn't actively bring me up to be, this conformist girl, right? But it's something that society at large, my extended family and everything, right? That's how, I was brought up, that you have to conform. And when I was asked to leave, college after a year, I did so, right? I didn't think it was a big deal. But deep down, obviously, I carried that resentment with me. And for 10 years, I was just, and it was just this trip that changed it, because I realized that, okay, so I have given up on my education, but, I always wanted to write. So, maybe I should write. And that's why my piece is about this trip and how, it changed my perspective on Pakistan and my life.
Yeah, thank you, Sundus. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And like I said, your piece is deeply moving. I think a lot of people felt that. So thank you for being honest. So I want to come to you now. You write about Pakistan through the lens of cricket, but also through your family history. And in particular, again, because Amber, I should mention, Amber lives in Abu Dhabi. And so we've talked about every single piece in the book. And I was talking to her about this conversation as well. And I was like, just talking about the questions I want to put together. And, we exchanged ideas. And so whilst your piece talks about cricket, the other angle is you're also telling this story through your family history. And, one salient part of it is through your grandmother, Princess Abida Sultan, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who was the heir apparent to the throne in Bhopal. And so, whilst I want to ask you to talk about the cricket piece, and you can do that now, or I can come back to you with that later, but without putting you on the spot, I'm curious to ask you, for starters, to talk a little bit about tracing your identity and engagement with Pakistan through your family history. And in particular, sir, talk to us a little bit about this figure of your grandmother, because it is just so inspiring. And I was talking to Sundus about feminism a minute ago, but all that while back, I don't know what else could be more symbolic. So if you don't mind, let's start there.
Yeah, thank you, Saba, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to speak a little bit about our very complex relationship with our country. And I think you've absolutely right. And, when I was thinking about the piece, cricket came to my mind, but there's I think there's a much stronger push that comes, or a much stronger sort of connection that comes through the family. Starting with my grandmother and then going on to my father, who was also, spent his entire life in service of Pakistan through his involvement with the Foreign Office. But, it's a bit awkward to talk about one's own kind of, or one's family's achievements. But honestly speaking, I think my grandmother was such a remarkable personality that you couldn't help but be completely taken in with her story, which is a absolutely remarkable story. And I still haven't learned all of it. I learn about it from, some of the books that she wrote, but also from people who have interacted with her and have actually gone on to write academic pieces about Bhopal and the Begums of Bhopal. And she would have been the next generation of those. But, we all called her Huzur, and that was a very apt name, because really she had this regal air about her, which, I don't think the rest of us certainly have. I think the royalty of Bhopal finished with my grandmother, really. But, there's royalty, and then there was what Huzur was, which was, someone who was brought up to be a leader, and she was prepared for that role from very early on. But in a different kind of way. So, she was also a remarkable shikari, went tiger hunting, did all the things that the royals did, polo player, horseback riding, education in Farsi, in English, in Urdu. But also she was a very, very good mechanic. She was a sports person. I think there were very few things that she didn't do. And there was a simplicity about her, I think, that came through very strongly to us. And every night that I did spend with her, whether it was in Malir, in Karachi, a lot of the stories would come out in those evening sessions when she would talk about, her motivation of coming to Pakistan. And, that is, I think, something that really stays with you, in that here was someone who left everything behind in India. She didn't get, evacuee property. She didn't get anything from the state. She came here. She built her house in Malir. She liked the fact that it was similar to Bhopal. It reminded her of, at that time, the openness, the greenery. And it was away from the maddening crowd. And she built this house where she lived for all her life, really. But she talked about how much she loved being there. And for someone who'd left behind palaces and comfort and financial security, it was an enormous sacrifice, I felt. But she never made us feel as if it was a sacrifice. She did it happily. She never regretted it. And so that story becomes such a powerful defining factor for, of course, my father, but also for all of us who then have this connection to Pakistan. But it is really through my grandmother that you get that sense of purpose, because, like I said, it was incredible what she left behind and what she established in Karachi. And the fact that she didn't have regret. She never spoke about, oh my God, we had so much in Bhopal. I don't have the same here. She'd drive herself. She didn't have a driver. She would repair her own car. She would repair, everything at home. She was also an electrician. And, every time that I kind of thought, Huzur is making up stories about what she did, I would find out later that no, it was absolutely true. So to date, I keep finding out things about her that I thought may have been exaggerations, but weren't. So, I credit so much to her in terms of the role model that she was for my father and for all the grandchildren who came later. So yeah, she had an enormous and outsized impact on my relationship with Pakistan.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because, I know you don't often talk about this side of things. And I'm curious also just to ask you, is there anything that's being documented on her, or is there something along those lines that's happening or that has happened?
So, I think we as a family have been very bad at keeping things. So things have been scattered. And, because my father was in the Foreign Service, you often lost things. So I think that has been, one feels it now, that I wish I had managed to document this. Luckily, the book that she wrote, Rebel Princess, was something that is, it's there for people to read. And my father wrote Begums of Bhopal. So a lot of that came in. But there is so much more that one keeps coming across. And there are people who met with my grandmother and who, like myself, were impacted in similar ways and have documented things. A friend of mine who's in America now sent me movies of Bhopal and the time that they spent there. And, something like that is just incredible. And then there's also photographs of both Bhopal and of Malir and the house being built. So some of that is there. She wrote a diary, I think from the age of 7. Every day she would write and keep a diary until very late on when her eyesight really just failed her. And I've managed to get hold of some of that. And I'm beginning to go through, what were the defining features of Pakistan's history? What did she feel about them when they actually happened? So it's a long, long project, and I hope we can do something with it. But yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Seher, I'll come to you now. You're part of the diaspora. You identify as Pakistani American, and your writing draws a lot from your Pakistani background and upbringing. And when I read your piece, there was this very strong sense of place as protagonist almost, despite being physically removed from Pakistan. And I often think this, that as a young voice, there still seems to be this visceral connection to Pakistan, which is really inspiring to have read in this and in your other work. And there's one part that I want to quote from your piece, where you write that this is how you end it. You say, "Home is not a place after all, perhaps, but rather the feeling of knowing that the place existed, in the beautiful recollections of my parents, and in the knowledge that no matter where I go, I still came from somewhere, even if it is a place to which I cannot return, home." So talk to us about how you've explored identity through this Pakistani American lens in the piece, especially, dare I say, at a time where there's a lot of uncertainty in America, and that's, being spoken about the world over. And also say a little bit about this part of, even if it's a place that I'm not able to return to. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. So I think identity is something that you think about a lot as someone who is part of a diaspora. It's this very sort of weird second space where, you are in one place, but you don't quite feel that, I'm from here because I have all of these connections through my parents, through my language, through my food, to another place. And then you go to that second place and you still have this feeling of, I'm not quite here either because I have an accent, I haven't grown up here, it doesn't quite feel like home because I don't feel at ease to move around as I do in the first place. So kind of exploring identity through this piece and tying it to the place was something that was really grounding for me. And exploring it also a little bit through this lens of grief in a way, because what inspired me to write the piece, we'd actually gotten my father and his brother, they actually had made a decision quite recently to sell our family home. And this was a place that I've been coming back to, since I was a very small child. And that is for a long time what felt to me like this is my tie to this place. This is where I come back to. This is what grounds me to Pakistan, to Karachi. So it was kind of like looking through lens of grief that I wrote this piece and kind of coming to grips with, well, if I don't have this place to return to, can I come back? Is Pakistan a place I can go to? Am I still a Pakistani American, or am I just an American now that I don't have this? It was just so much more than a house. It was a safe place to land. It was home, and now that we are facing this prospect of not having it, am I now a guest in this country that even now I still think of as homeland, even though I was born somewhere else, I have citizenship somewhere else. So I think, that's coming to grips with that. And like, am I losing a part of my identity because this place is now gone? But writing this piece almost was like coming to terms with that grief. It's a little bit different than grief as you might think of. It's a little bit more existential, I think. But I think there are opportunities too in that loss, which is what writing this really helped me come to terms with. It's going to take more of an effort to go and explore and be in Pakistan now, but that doesn't mean I can't do it. It's going to test my conviction in wanting to go and to maintain those connections that make me a Pakistani American. It will test whether, how committed I am to staying connected to that history, but it'll perhaps force me out of the comfort zone as well. So, I talked a little bit toward the end of the piece about visiting with the lens of a tourist. And I was sort of pushing myself then that, let's go out and do this. Let's take a tour. Let's visit historical sites. Let's talk to people about what their connections to this place are, what their stories are. And I really try and make a big effort to talk to my relatives, especially about, what are your stories growing up? What were your experiences? Tell me about this place that you used to live in. And through that, I think I'm maintaining identity through that sort of shared history that's being passed down. You were talking earlier about, what documentation does there exist, for people's families, their grandmothers. I think it's so important to sort of start collecting those stories if we haven't already, because that's what ties us to a place. That's what helps us maintain identity, even through movement, even through, throughout generations. I think that's what keeps me tied to being a Pakistani American is those stories.
Thanks, Seher. Thank you so much. Amber, I'm going to come to you. Part of your motivation to, again, similar to what I said to Sundus, to write this really raw and kind of close to the bone piece was to share your journey and your past with your sons. That's what you said. And you've got 3 sons. And, that made me realize like that's the power of storytelling. We're talking about documenting and all of that. So in a similar vein, talk about what the craft and the process of writing a piece with that degree of honesty. You've written about your father, you've written about other family members, you've written about your mother, your sister, there are references to your uncle and many other people. And it's an uncensored piece. And this was the first time you were putting pen to paper about something like this. How does one do so without the reaction, without the fear of what are people going to say, without fearing the reaction of XYZ, and almost creating what I thought was a cinematic effect with your writing? Talk to us about that.
So Saba, like you mentioned, mine is a very personal account of my life growing up in the 70s and 80s. And the connection to Pakistan is because it was a very different Pakistan in the 70s and the 80s, the political, social landscape. It's a huge contrast from what it is now. So that was the reason, that's the theme basically. The home is complicated, where my story connects with the theme. Other than that, if I was to write, I couldn't have done it any other way. Because it had to be, like I said, I wrote it for my children. When the children are young, I have 3 boys, okay? So they have all the time in the world for you. But obviously, they're not ready for this kind of shared anecdotal account of your past history. It's always whitewashed, everything was great when the kids are small. When the kids are older, they don't have the time. They're busy with their studies and with their friends, with their gadgets, and which is fine. I'm not complaining. So I wanted my kids to know about my personal history, my life growing up. And it wasn't the easiest. And kids in the UAE tend to have a very cushy life. So I wanted them to know. And the other thing is that the vulnerability and the emotional weight of my piece could only be written down. You can't talk about a lot of anecdotes that I've shared. I could never talk about them. It has to be written down, I feel. And the nuances and the between the lines emotions, they come out much better in writing. So that prompted me to write. And yeah, it was also, I'll tell you, my parents are not alive. So that made it easier for me to take the courage to write what I did. And at this stage in life, I feel I really, you become like your own person. You stop caring about what others think, what others feel. It had to be an honest account. And that's what I did.
Yeah, I completely hear you. Thanks, Amber. So I just want to circle back to you and maybe ask you to talk a little bit about the cricket part of the story as well. I mean, that's part of the lens you use to trace your relationship with Pakistan. Of course, everyone's aware of the relationship that your father had, but then you yourself have a relationship with the sport. You've got a book out on it, Cricket in Pakistan, Nation Identity and Politics. So talk a little bit about that other lens through which you've explored the piece?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the cricket bit came also in a sense through family. And what I mean by that is because my father was in the Foreign Service, we were constantly moving. Every 3 years, every 4 years, you'd be in a different place, then you'd come back to Pakistan. So in some ways, what happens is that you develop this relationship with Pakistan that is both close and not so close because you're not in the country. I mean, 4 years in Jordan, years in England, sometimes in Geneva, Paris, etc. So, you're not grounded in the country itself, and your relationship as a result is slightly different. And you're looking for ways in which you sort of remain in touch with Pakistaniyat, if you want to call it that. And for my parents, the things that were most prominent were certainly the food. The food is always something that keeps us connected, and we'd always have our food made in whatever in at home, whether we were in Jordan or whether we were elsewhere. We would have our food made. Music was another big thing. Wherever my father was, we'd have qawwalis, and so Sabri brothers would come across to Jordan or wherever else. So these, I think, were the kinds of things that kept you connected to Pakistan. And then, of course, there was cricket, and that came from the fact that my father was a fanatic cricket supporter, played it also. And obviously him playing it meant that me and my brothers, I have two other brothers, all grew up playing cricket. And if you play cricket, you watch cricket, and the affinity grows with particular cricket teams. And I think I mentioned in the chapter that it wasn't something that came immediately as far as Pakistan was concerned. I think those of us who lived through the 70s, everyone's favorite team in the 70s were the West Indians. But in time, you became more attached to your own cricket team. And sport is such an emotional thing. It's something that tugs at your emotions. That I think for me, I don't know for others, but I'm pretty sure that you tend to remember sporting events. They tend to be burnt into your memory. So 1992 World Cup is something that everyone remembers, us winning, and that's where the connection came to Pakistan. You followed it fanatically, and there's an element of nationalism and patriotism that comes into that. I think for Pakistan, some of our most proud moments have come through sport. Maybe not so recently, but as a Pakistani abroad, to see Jahangir Khan winning 10 British Opens, you could talk about it with other people and say, this is a Pakistani. And to see the Pakistan cricket team winning, you could hold your head up high and say, we won, we defeated England. And so there was a great amount of pride, which also comes from your hockey team in the 90s, from your cricket team, from your squash players. And most recently with Arshad Nadeem winning a gold. And, suddenly it lifted the entire country, and you could say proudly that you are from Pakistan. Otherwise, unfortunately, the last few decades have been so difficult for us that I don't like saying this, but sometimes you hesitate to say I'm a Pakistani because, there's been so much negativity about Pakistan. But, when it comes to these sporting encounters, you just feel a certain pride. So I think that is where the cricketing element came for me, and it kept me in touch with Pakistan.
Yeah, I think all of us on the call can relate to that for sure. Sundus, I want to ask you, sort of jumping off of your piece, now that you're a mother and your kids are actually a little older, when you reflect on your story and everything that you've written, are there things that you want to pass on about this experience of growing up as a Pakistani girl, and are there parts that you want to shed? How do you think about this as a parent?
Okay, so I feel like my life has come in a full circle because my daughter is currently in LAMS. She's in her first year, right? So it was kind of like very bittersweet when I dropped her. Because LAMS has changed so much. I was visiting it after like, I don't know, 18 years. And I was like, this isn't the LAMS I remember. There's so many more buildings, we are the open grounds, where I say the distance between the male and the female hostel is negligible now, because first we had to walk so much. Now it's like, you just look around and, they're very close. So it was like, so I brought up my daughter, so that she didn't become a conformist, right? I told her that her happiness is not linked to my happiness, right? Something that was kind of like ingrained in my upbringing without my parents actively acknowledging it, right? So I, made a personal choice to tell her that her life is not connected to mine. She doesn't. I don't need to live vicariously through her. So LAMS was something that she decided on her own, right? It wasn't something that I wanted, like obviously it's a great school, and I would, I'm happy she's there, but it wasn't because I went there, right? It was something that she wanted to do, right? So this is how I brought her differently, because I taught her that uh, you need to have your own dreams, and it's okay. You don't always have to be. You have to be a good individual, but you don't always have to think about the others around her. But somehow, I think she's the most compassionate, and she's the most perceptive about, from among all my children. She can feel what others are feeling. She understands it. So somehow I think, no matter how much you actively try to suppress something, everybody is their own person, and it's just how they, the nature versus the nurture debate is still going strong. So let's see what happens. So basically that's that.
That's incredible that she's at LUMS. That's such a great story. Zain, I deliberately wanted to keep this short because people's attention spans online are so short. So I'm gonna wrap now, but maybe I'll wrap with asking each of you a question that seems like a little bit of a cliche, but sir, you mentioned Pakistaniyat, and I think that sort of lies at the heart of why this whole book was put together. And even for the title, I think I was very intentional about saying it is complicated. And so the idea is, I was somewhere for a book talk in Abu Dhabi, and somebody said, I hope this is not like a Pakistan bashing book. And I thought to myself, well, it's not a Pakistan bashing book, but at the same time, it's not a whitewashing exercise. And so the point is that we're trying to speak to the New York Times headlines. We're trying to speak to the cardboard cutout impressions of Pakistan. And if nothing else, to offer kind of a more nuanced version. I know that word's a bit overused. And I think, dare I say that I think the anthology is done. It's a good starting point for trying to do that, because we don't hear those sides of Pakistan enough. So maybe I'll end, and Zain, let me start and end with you, and then I'll come to everybody else slowly. Talk to us about your relationship with Pakistan and how you would sum up what being Pakistani means to you. And that's the question I'll take with everybody else, and then we can wrap.
All right. Very easy question to answer. My relationship with Pakistan is, I think it has changed. When I left LUMS, I came back to Karachi to work for a while, and then I went to Europe for a few years, to Germany and Italy, lived there for a few years. Then I went to the US for a few years. Now I live in Morocco. When I first moved to Germany and then came back to Pakistan, I used to tell people, "Maza nahi aaya." Like I was always, that was my line. My line was always, yeah, nobody laughs there. It's like nobody seems to get my jokes, because when you associate, like when I think about Karachi, or when I think about my Pakistani friends, the thing that comes to my mind is nonsensical laughter. Like I just remember laughing at the dumbest things, and bonding over cricket. Those are the two things that I remember, or that I associate with this identity of being Pakistani. Laughing, because most of that laughter is kind of dark laughter. because we seem to have this tendency to be able to laugh at absolutely anything or find humor in anything, because I think we're so desperate to find that humor, because everything is sadly not the best. It hasn't been the best for a while. So yeah, but at that point, when I first came back, it was that, but then I went to the US again and I came back saying the same thing. I was like, yeah, well, like same thing. It was just I couldn't find what I was looking for there. And then I lived and taught here for 5 or 6 years. And then now I seem to have I think I've stopped looking. It's a little sad, but I've stopped looking for that maza that I was looking for, because it has gotten even for me a little difficult to, at least in Karachi, like to be here. In a lot of ways. I also got married in the interim, and I think my view of what Pakistan was or could offer also changed. Because now I was thinking for also with another person. So now for me, the idea of what Pakistan is, or my relationship to Pakistan, is more of I like a place that I don't know. It's very hard to describe. But it's not a place that currently that I associate with a lot of joy. It used to be a place that I associated with a lot of joy. It is not that place now at this point in time, unfortunately. But I hope at some point it will be, and maybe I will get to say the yo maza nahi aaya, but idhar aa raha hai, like that thing at some point in the future. But unfortunately, that's where it's at. And I think with my writing, or with the things I'm trying to write, I'm trying to find that sense of joy at some point, because I think the best way to write about a place is to leave that place. So hopefully I'll be able to write something and maybe find some joy there, and yeah, that sounds depressing, but unfortunately that's where I'm at this point in time. And yeah, there's a second part to your question. Have I answered that?
Yeah, I think you've certainly answered that. Yeah. Thank you, Zain. Thanks for being honest.
Mhm.
Amber, do you want to take that?
Yeah. Saba, I had a great love and passion for my country, and it's not there anymore. And being an expat living here in the UAE, and again, I'm not going to whitewash any statements. Last 2 years, I have not felt that pride in calling myself a Pakistani. It's just not there. Why should I hide it? If it's not there, it's not there. But of course, and also one of the reasons, home is also where your family is. I don't have any family in Pakistan, but I still felt very connected. We never pursued a foreign passport. We always wanted to go back because my husband and I both felt very strongly for Pakistan. And like Ali Khan had mentioned, cricket used to bring the country together. We had this sense of pride. Last 2 years, I'm not even watching any matches. The last 2 years, especially, I would say, things have been happening since a while, but it's a very dismal picture, what we see. And I don't see every passing day, I don't get to hear any good news. So what is there to feel proud of? But having said that, I'll end my session with Faiz Ahmad Faiz ki nazm. लौट जाती है उधर को भी नजर क्या कीजिए, अब भी दिलकश है तेरा हुस्न मगर क्या कीजिए, और भी दुख हैं जमाने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, राहतें और भी हैं वस्ल की राहत के सिवा. That deep-rooted connection will never go away. But we cry for our country, we feel sad, anything but pride.
Thanks, Amber. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. Seher, how about you?
So I am going to come at it a little bit differently. I feel a lot of pride in telling people that I'm from Pakistan, especially now, because, this has been happening. I touched upon it in my piece a little bit, after 9/11, being brown, looking Muslim, was hard in America. I'm from California, so we weren't feeling it quite as much here. I didn't actually experience any direct racism to my face actually until I moved to Boston for my master's. And that was the first time someone was blatantly racist to me because of the way that I looked. But it was a little bit more difficult when I was younger. I didn't like speaking Urdu. I didn't like wearing shalwar kameez outside. I was like, this makes me look like a fob. I don't want to be associated with this. But as I got older, I started listening to my nani, to my mom, to my dad when they were telling me stories, and it became more important for me to listen and think about, I want to maintain my connection to this place, because no matter how much it might bring me grief or cause people to be terrible to me, it is part of who I am. It's part of how I represent myself in the world. And so, I started insisting, like, I want to speak Urdu at home. I want to know about your childhood. I want to know about the places that you've been and, how you've conducted yourself being from this place. And it became important and part of who I am, and really a point of pride to me to tell people wherever I go, I'm not American, I'm Pakistani American. Even when I travel now, this is a little funny, but I travel and people ask me where I'm from, and I always say I'm from Pakistan. I don't say America first. And in a lot of places in Europe, maybe, people will be just like, ugh. But like when I lived in Turkey for a semester, I said Pakistani first, and I made friends in like Turkish friends because of that. They were immediately on, oh, your name's Seher, like we have that name in Turkey too. Oh, we have so many common words with Urdu, let's talk about them. Same thing in Egypt, people were good to you because you were from Pakistan. You didn't actually want to tell them you were American, because it's just like, oh, no one likes Americans. But you tell them you're Pakistani, oh, you're my sister, like, tell me how I can help you. I've had that experience so many times when I've been traveling, that, I was able to talk to people off the beaten path because they weren't seeing me as an American, they were seeing me as a Pakistani person. And that gave me connection with so many other people in the world. So there's that. And then, like, I keep going back to this point of story and history. I think one of the themes of this festival is truth to power. And part of that truth is that, we may see that Pakistan is crumbling, there's so much corruption, there's, people are suffering, there's so much violence going on. That's all true. But that doesn't change the fact that our country has such a rich history that goes back so far. There's so many hundreds of languages that are spoken in Pakistan. There's so many traditions. This history of fashion and clothing, like of entertainment, of storytelling, of poetry. These are things that I take a lot of pride in telling people that, this is where I come from. This is part of my DNA. This is who I am. And that's always going to be true. So I want to not sugarcoat what is terrible, because there is a lot that's terrible, but there's also so much that's good, and you can't have one without the other. So that's kind of what Pakistan is to me.
Yeah, thanks, Sahar. Thank you so much. Sundus?
So for me, being Pakistani means persevering, right? It means loving your country immensely, and you're doing absolutely nothing to, solve its, improve its situation, right? A drawing room conversation is centered around, what ails Pakistan, we complain about the infrastructure, lack of civil resources, corruption, deteriorating law and order situation, everything. And yet we don't do anything to, improve or provide a solution, right? So that's like Pakistani's favorite pastime. We're extremely nationalists as long as it's convenient to be, right? We'll shout we'll be the loudest cheerleader at a cricket match, but asked to step out of a comfort zone and, be part of the solution, we can immediately take a step back, because that's not. So being Pakistani is somebody who loves their country and loves to complain about their country. So that's what I think being Pakistani means.
Go ahead. So I want to leave the last words to you, and we'll end with that. So please, yes.
So, Saba, I have to actually thank you for making me think about this question of I mean, what is home? I hadn't really considered it until you said, think about it and write something up. So, and having read the book, what struck me was that people talk about good and bad. And you can see that from what people are saying now at the end of our session. It's not all good and it's not all bad, but I think there's real honesty about where we're at the moment. And I think that's really it shows that we are diverse people and we have very differing experiences of what Pakistan meant to us and what it has become to us now. And I think one of the things you did want to show is that diversity of experience. And, linked to that, it made me think about, Pakistan as home for people that it should be home for, but it isn't anymore. And by that, I mean minorities, the disenfranchised, this is meant to be home for them, but, what kind of home has it become? For a country that was built upon, this is a country being made for the minority in India, the way that we have subsequently treated and continue to treat some of our minorities is, we've forgotten the reason that Pakistan was made. So it made me think of that. But it also makes me think about home is also a place of conflict and pain quite often, right? And home requires work. Just like marriages require work, just like friendships require work. I think that home requires a lot of work, and we've neglected to do that for many, many decades now, and that's why we are where we are right now. And I absolutely, I understand the Seher are very, very tough at the moment. And we try and hang on to things. But, personally speaking, I still receive a lot of love and respect in the country. It may be that I'm privileged in many ways, I'm protected in many ways, but I do receive that kind of love and respect that I don't think I'd get anywhere else. And I go back full circle to my family, and I think that I'm left still with a sense of purpose for this flailing country, but I'm left with a sense of purpose, and it might be a false sense of purpose. And, I'll end up here in a country that is really not gone anywhere, but I still have that sense of purpose. And I still get from time to time enough encouragement to say that I can't yet let this go. So, we're 75 years old. In many ways, we're not a very old country. And I hope we can set things in the right direction for generations to come.
Yeah, that's such a great note to end on. I think what you said about purpose really spoke to me, and it's something for each of us to think about. I want to thank all of you again for being.
Excuse me,
Yeah,
sorry. Can
please
I
go
just
ahead. Of
interject?
course, please do.
I'd like to share. I'd like to hear your opinion as well on this.
Mine.
Yeah, of
In
course.
the interest of time, I'm going to say hashtag it's complicated. No, I think, I really like what you said about purpose to end with, and it's something that, I think about a lot myself. The only caveat I'll add is that as people sitting outside Pakistan, sometimes it's like I find myself oscillating between sometimes having like rose-tinted glasses and saying things are, you look at it in this romanticized, nostalgic kind of way. Whereas on the other hand, you see people languishing in jails. You see the way women are being treated. It's fairly unprecedented. And it's pretty soul crushing. This afternoon, I'll sum it up by saying this afternoon, I was talking to somebody and I said, uh, the year my husband got abducted in Karachi, which is 2013, and I've written about that in my piece for the book. I just remember my first thought being, thank God I don't have children here right now. I don't have children, period. And so I think from 2013 to now, yes, in some ways, maybe things have become better, but in so many ways, we're still where we were. And so it's complicated. Let's just say it's complicated. And but I'm going to borrow from what you said, sir, and kind of let's leave it at that. I think where you said that I think none of us on this call would disagree that I don't think we're ready to let go just yet. And these don't have to be major strides and kind of big changes, but in our small ways. And allow me to say that the anthology was very much initiated and sent out into the world with that spirit and that soul. So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I'm so glad, Amber, you'll agree because we've done this at Karachi and other places physically, but it's so lovely to be able to hear from voices across the globe. And thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has any final thoughts or words to say. Otherwise, we can wrap. Yeah.
Just Saba, congratulations and great job putting all of this together. The anthology was a breath of fresh air, a pleasure to contribute to, and I just like how it wasn't, the sugar coating that we talked about, or just a complete bashing of the country. It was complicated. It is complicated. It's very obvious that it's complicated, and I think we should revisit this anthology in a few years and see if it's still complicated. It'll probably still be, but yeah. No, there's thank you for this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think my time at LUMS doing anthropology with Seher has really taught me one thing, which is don't dumb it down. And if it's complex, then you've got to I think people don't engage with Pakistan through that lens enough. And this was an endeavor in that direction. So thank you so much.